And good evening, everybody, and welcome to the virtual home of the Princeton Public Library here on Zoom. My name is Janie Herman, and I'm the Adult Programming Manager at the Princeton Public Library. It is my pleasure to host this evening's author event, where Martha McPhee will be in discussion with Jonathan Galassi about his recently published novel, School Days. Before we begin, I would like to thank Jessica Greer at Other Press for assistance with arranging details for tonight, and Labyrinth Books of Princeton for partnering with us and being our bookseller. If you'd like to purchase School Days from Labyrinth Books, they have copies in stock. I'll be putting the link in the chat. You can have them shipped to your house, or you can shop there in person. You can reserve one and pick it up in the store. Please note that this event is being recorded, and our events typically go up on our YouTube channel within a few days. If you have friends or colleagues who could not make it tonight, let them know that it's been recorded. I will put the YouTube link in our chat. I will now introduce our guests and ask them to turn on their cameras to join us on screen. I think Jonathan's already here with us, which is great. So Martha, if you want to join us. During their conversation, please feel free to ask questions using the Q&A function for either of our panelists to answer at the end of the conversation. So it is my great pleasure tonight to introduce Jonathan Galassi. He's the chairman of Farrar, Straus Giroux. He is a former poetry editor for the Paris Review, a former chairman of the Academy of American Poets, and the recipient of a Guggenheim Fellowship for Poetry. He is the author of 3 poetry collections, the novel Muse, and an eminent translator of Italian poetry. He is joined by Martha McPhee, who is the author of the novels An Elegant Woman, Dear Money, L'America, Gorgeous Lies, and Bright Angel Time. Her work has been honored with fellowships from the National Endowment of the Arts and the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation. In 2002, she was nominated for a National Book Award. She is a tenured member of the English department at Hofstra University, where she teaches fiction. So we are going to open tonight with a reading from Jonathan from the novel School Days. I'm going to disappear to the screen and let Martha and Jonathan take it away. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, Jamie. And I'm very honored to be here in Princeton. And very delighted and chuffed that Martha has agreed to talk to me. She's such a good writer herself that I don't know if I can measure up, but I'll do my best. This book is my second novel. It's called School Days, and it's about a boarding school it's about 2 phases of a boarding school, one about 50 years ago and the other more contemporary. And it's about changes in the lives of the characters and in the school also. So I'm going to read a few pages from the beginning to give you a sense of the character, the principal character, whose name is Sam Brandt, who's a teacher at the school and also a graduate of the school, and a little feel for the book, for the school itself. Late afternoon sunlight was flooding the apartment. Pillars of dust rotated in the drowsy air. He was glad to be home after a long day, ready to put up his feet and look at the paper, but the phone was vibrating in his jacket pocket. He leaned back on the island in the kitchen and listened to the message from Jean Harrison, the head secretary. "Good afternoon, Sam," she enunciated crisply. "Boris would like to see you in his office at 5 o'clock. The island was too big for the room. He and Anne had always got in each other's way when they cooked together, which they did if they couldn't face the dining hall. The pattern in the fake marble made it impossible to keep clean, since you couldn't see the dirt unless you were viewing it from the proper angle. But it wasn't their kitchen after all. Leverett's head of facilities had radiated pride when he showed them the house after it had been rebuilt, certified LEED Gold. It was 100% energy efficient and tight as a tick. The only way to let fresh air into the place was to open the door and fan it in. But the man was blind to how ugly his state-of-the-art remake of this ramshackle old New England farmhouse was. Bixler House one of some 40 residences in the town of Leverett that had been annexed for senior faculty and staff to live in once they'd done their 20 years of dorm duty, had been handsome in a shambling, peeling paint, splintered way. Now the new windows were out of proportion, and the kitchen dining room with its pale linoleum floor belonged in a nursing home, as Anne put it. It looked institutional inside and out, which of course it was. Boris's office was in Main Hall on the north side of the Oval, the great lawn which School Street divides from the town green, with its congregational church, yellow brick library, historical society, and row of stately black on white federal houses, just the way the center of one of Connecticut's oldest and most prosperous towns ought to look. To the north and east, the burnt umber Halsey Hills lay low slung beyond the invisible but still powerfully present Wachusett River. The school's stately acreage, emerald lawns flanked by stands of hardwood and traversed by the pokey Leverett River, served up a picture postcard image of a bygone idyllic New England. He'd spent more than half his life here, 4 years of high school back when it was still all boys. Where I got my education, he always said. Leverett is one of the oldest, richest, and most academically distinguished high schools in the country. Classes took place in tutorial sessions of no more than 10 or 12. Students were encouraged to, no, expected to have ideas and defend them, which meant that Leverett's boys, girls too now for the past 40 years, were famously articulate, at times insufferably so. The name evokes old globes in firelit libraries, striped silk ties, stiff ancestral portraits, athletes with cleated shoes and muddy thighs. The sons of presidents had gone here, if not presidents themselves. Senators, secretaries of state, scions of the robber barons and investment bankers who evolved into what passed for an American aristocracy. Levin more recently with the sons and daughters of aspirational professionals who wanted their children to hobnob with the establishment. The school boasted relatively few artists or writers among its alumni, but it had always exuded an aura of meritocratic rather than purely pecuniary elitism. No one cares who you are when you come to Leverett, the saying went. It's who you become while you're here that counts. Meaning that you too, if you kiss the rod, could be instilled with Leverett values, could dress, behave, think, and feel the Leverett way. So that's the setup. That's Leverett. And then what happens here stays there.
That's a fabulous description. And this isn't the question I was going to begin with, but I'm so struck by how I can see it so perfectly. I wonder if you can speak to creating that. I imagine it's part based on various boarding schools that we all know about, but also partly your imagination. So,
well, it was great fun to create the plan of the school. I mean, I did go around and visit a few schools. It's supposed to be outside of Hartford, and so I did go see a few schools outside of Hartford, and I begged, borrowed, and stole a few details. But I loved trying to create the place. It's sort of a put together of various locales, but they all look that way, sort of. So, yeah. But for instance, one thing I did is I made the dorms of the school yellow brick instead of the usual red brick. And one of my friends who went to school with me at a place I won't mention said, "Why did you do that? Why did you make them?" And I said, "Because I wanted it to be different. I wanted to invent it." So yeah. That was fun. Invention is fun. You
Yes,
know that as a novelist.
I do. And I love that you went around to these schools to get, beg, borrow, steal, as you put it, I think. Because those research trips, so you feel like you're doing something, but you're not doing that awful work of sitting at the computer. You're charging your imagination.
Right. It was really fun to do that. I was surreptitiously nosing around Loomis School, for instance, you know.
Who's that creep over there with his notepad?
It was a Sunday morning. No one was around.
Okay, right. So, you know, this book is ostensibly about the surfacing of a sex scandal. I mean, that's a premise that kicks it off. It's not, you know, a mystery in the novel. We sort of know right away what's being investigated. But there's so many other layers that are so that are you know, that take over the book and are the richer material of the book in a way, even though this premise holds it all together. But it's such a commitment to become involved with the book. I don't know how long it took you, but any amount of time is a long commitment. What was the nerve? So some of the other layers here are desire, love, teaching, learning, finding out ultimately who one is. That's really at the heart of this book. Understanding the self. Then there's also so much time that's covered because he's a boy at the school, and many years later he's his professor. I think it spans 50 years. So the world changes, and this just one example: the old boy, environment becomes a co-ed institution, and the kids are just totally different. But what was the nerve for you? What drove? Obviously, sex scandals at boarding schools are in the news. But
yes, I mean that was a given. And as you say, that I didn't want to write a mystery about who was the perp and blah blah blah. But the mystery is more: did this person really do? What exactly did this person do, and why? And what does that say about the fact that he was, by all accounts, you never hear from him. He's dead by the time this is investigated. Right. But by all accounts, he was a great teacher. So how could he be a great teacher and an abuser of students? And was he? And that's one of the paradoxes that the book investigates. Why did I write the book? I went to a school like this. It is where I got my education and it formed me in many ways. And I did pay attention to these stories about teachers abusing students. And by the way, parenthetically, when these schools became co-ed, which they did 40 years ago, the stories of abuse really began to center more around girls than around boys, which is, I think, a fascinating comment on what's really involved in these cases. It's often something about power, about power differentials, but I think, so there's definitely an autobiographical element in this character, Sam Brandt. What happens is that the head of the school asks him to investigate a charge made by one of his classmates about a teacher who turns out to have been his favorite teacher, but he's dead. And so the fact that he was asked to do this sets him into a reverie of remembering his own experience, and that takes up the first half of the book. Really, you see him as a student, you see him dealing with other kids, you see the kids relating to each other and to the teachers, and then you see the school as it is in the modern world, and so there's all sorts of contrasts.
And how much of that did you understand going into it? I can never remember who said this, a famous novelist, a man, that writing a novel is like driving the thick fog at night with the high beams on. Yeah,
It's a great line. I don't know who said that.
Yeah, it's maybe Russell Banks or Russell Baker. Russell Banks, but I can't remember. But I love it, and I use it all the time. But you're feeling your way along. There's a lot of complexity in here with this layering that I'm speaking about, and just another example. We have Theo is the teacher, the beloved teacher who, as you said, inspired all these kids, and yet at the same time was abusing some of them.
Or may have been.
May have been. That's crucial. Yes.
Accused of abusing them. Yes, right.
Accused of abusing them. And then you have Sam, and I didn't really realize this until I was really reflecting on the book after having finished it. Sam is a professor too. He's the next generation, and he has beloved students, and one that he works with, Peter, very closely. But you don't get the sense that anybody's ever going to accuse this man down the line of, being inappropriate.
I mean, yes, that's true. He says about the kids that they're like another species to him. He doesn't have that problem. It turns out he's gay, actually. In the course of the book, he comes to terms with that. But he's not. That's not his. At the same time, he does kind of have a crush on his students. He says that, but he's not interested in having power over them.
So how much of that were you like consciously? I'm very interested in the line between what we do unconsciously in our work and what, obviously with revision, you go back, and if you can see yourself, you have a sense that you're getting at something, but it might be undeveloped. But that's a very tricky dichotomy, and so seamlessly, so organic to the story, and so rich for thought. Like how are these two people from this similar environment?
Well, I spent a lot of time writing this book. It took me about 6 years to write it. Often, I'm doing other things, and I tried it several different ways. I tried to interleave the present and the past, to go back and forth between them, but it was too confusing and too static in a way, and then I tried it in the first person also. And eventually I hit on this idea of having the memoir, his memories part, be separate and more or less the first part of the book. And then, so having these two, but what you say about consciousness of, there are things that one of my friends who read it said, oh, I see how X reveals Y, and I hadn't seen that myself, so there's a kind of structural, how would you say, integrity to a story that's genuine, that reveals itself in many different ways that maybe the writer isn't always conscious of.
Right. Yeah, that's fascinating. Sometimes it's really hard to talk about your own work because of that, but
yes, and I was blown away by what he said, and I can't go into it, it's too detailed, but yeah. The fact is, he was right about something that I hadn't been conscious of.
Because you brought up structure, I do think that is always very interesting in any kind of writing. But and it sounds like you struggled to get there. When you set it up as your reading shows us in a more of a present, it's 2007 as it happens. Then it goes back, and there's a bulk, maybe, I don't know, 100 pages or so that are
90, 100 pages, which is set in the 60s when Sam is a student, and he is a student of this beloved teacher. He's also in love with one of his fellow classmates, and he has other relationships with different boys, and you see the boys interrelating. And the fact is, there's a lot of hanky-pank, or there was in my day in schools, in same-sex schools. That sort of, it's what happens, so it isn't always written about, but it's true. So.
Very urgent, and very a lot of emotion, and a lot of trying to sort stuff out and understand who they are, and also at a time when people would be fired for being gay and being found out, and you had to keep everything closeted, and so there's all this subterranean stuff that you capture so electrically there. But
Martha, one of the things is, the kids could be fired for being gay, but not so much the teachers. The teachers were sometimes passed.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
The teachers were kind of let go and passed on to other schools. Like they used to call it passing the trash, but they didn't always. The schools didn't always tell the other schools what. It's a little bit like the church, in the church, that priests would be sent to another parish without a dossier.
Right. Here he arrives. So this is there's so many characters, and they're some of them sort of they're all distinct, and you juggle this the complexity of all these different characters interacting, all these boys and all their different emotions. Sammy loves Eddie, and Ron is rejected, and then you have your athletic star. And how did you do that? At some point I was like, the ships and the Iliad, like you don't need to remember all their names, just get the
well, and then my publisher said you need to put in a table, a list of the principal characters, and I did, to help that along. There are a lot of characters, but you couldn't really tell the story with just 2 or 3, because it's about a world, and it's about a closed environment, and so the interface among them is all important. And they come back in the book later on. He goes on a trip, and he visits all these people, and he sees what's become of them, and so that's essential to what the book is, I think.
This smart choice to create your structure that way. I find it fascinating how we land on structures that will work after trying all this stuff. And
if you've tried everything else.
Oh my Lord! And then you've hit it. At the end, that you jump ahead to 2017, which I thought was interesting. That's in the first person.
Yes, I decided to, the last chapter is sort of a revisiting of the themes, and certain mysteries are possibly solved in them, but I decided I would put it in the first person because it brings Sam closer to the reader, and it's out of the realm of narration and memory, and more in the realm of meditation, I guess. Yeah, I thought that worked. I didn't actually put it in italics or anything because it seemed to flow naturally, but I really enjoyed writing that part. I have to.
Well, you said that you wrote part of it in the first person at some point, and then realized that you wanted to write third person.
I just thought third person allowed a lot more distance. It made the action less personal and more. It gave it more weight, I guess. I thought. Right. Have you ever tried that? Tried persons when you're? Maybe I shouldn't ask you that question.
No. Yes, I definitely have, and it took me a long. I always started in the first person. I mean, when I started writing, it was the first person, and then I felt like I had to learn the third person because it's very different. And I prefer it because you have much more latitude. You can go in and out, you can get close to your character, but you can move away from your character. And you do that with such grace here. I can't imagine it in the first person. So seeing that, the ending there where it's working and it's such a, you don't, like I would say to my students, you can't do that, you can't switch, but actually you can do anything if you do it well, which I also say to them when you do it.
I just read a novel by a writer I admire a lot, who we're publishing next year, Eleanor Catton. Do you know who she is? Yeah,
I don't.
She's a New Zealand writer, and her book is in the third person, but she goes in and out of the consciousness of different characters, which is very tricky, but she did it so beautifully. I was blown away really by that close third that is almost a first person.
Yeah.
Wow. So
you brought I'm skipping ahead a bit in my the questions I want to ask, but you bring up an author, and so I do wonder how this has been your career. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts about that and questions, but how do you learn from your writers? Have they has doing this, being a publisher and editor, has it?
I only started writing. This is only my second novel. I wrote the first one it's a kind of satire about publishing, and it was after Roger Strauss died, who was my mentor and someone your family knows very well, and it was a kind of way of doing a portrait of Roger. That was and it's a comedy about publishing, and so it was. I didn't know if I could do it. So what I did is every day I would write for a few hours and put it away and not look at it. And then after a month, I looked at it and I said, oh, well, yeah, I think I can do, and I had great fun with it. This book is much more personal, there's more emotionally invested in it. It's riskier, and it's not a comedy. It does have, there are satirical elements to it. But it's more serious, and so it was much harder to write. And also, I have to say, a number of people I showed it to said, "Oh, sexual abuse, no, thank you,"
Yeah.
And so, in a way, the sexual abuse issue it's the setup for the book, but it's not really what the book is about. It is about teaching. You said that. It's really, a lot of the book is about the student-teacher relationship in a good way. It's not, Sam, one of the things he does is he goes through especially with Peter Reno, his favorite student, they read poems and they talk about the poems and what they mean. And poetry is my first love, and so it's fun to put that in the book and to show the pedagogical relationship, because it is so fundamental. And Sam was inspired by Theo, the teacher you mentioned, and he became a teacher himself because he was so moved by how enabling teaching was, being taught was for him. Right. And so that's really core to the book for me.
Mm-hmm. And their relationship, that Sam is sent to find out more, and across the course of the novel, we're learning more about through the teaching as well about what went on between the two of them, in that kind of sense of learning from him. And he gives in his yearbook, I won't give it away, but there's a bit, there's something that's very powerful and moving that sticks with Sam. But I guess one, another question is, in keeping all of this, it's like you have all these balls in the air that you're juggling, and you're juggling them so seamlessly. is this, also at the heart of the book is this sense of trying to understand who Theo was, but also trying to understand who he is, who Sam is. And Sam's only tool, because as you said, Theo is dead, is to talk to other people. And these other people, are they reliable? Do they remember?
Right, exactly.
And there's this kind of gossip, or it's not really gossip, but it's this sort of sense of, casual story rather than, the indictment of a person's life, but it works so well. How did you come to that?
Well, I'm a great believer in gossip. Great gossip.
Form of storytelling.
Talk about research. I mean, how could, this is a person who, Theo was a person who, he was close to certain people, but only to a very few, and they're rather protective of him. So he has to sort of, how do you say, triangulate his experience of these people and other stories he's heard about it to try and figure out what actually did Theo do? What was, and I think that's the way we learn about the people in our lives, really. It's through experience of them, but also others, what others say. I mean, I had dinner the other night with the wife of a friend of mine who died last year, and I was very fond of him. But I saw her, it was over a year after, and she told me all these stories about him, that things I didn't know about him. It made me feel closer to both of them. But your information doesn't come off Wikipedia. It's about interpersonal connections. And my hope about the book is, at the end, there's this kicker and you supposedly know what really happened with Theo. But the fact is, the person who tells you isn't the most reliable character, and he might be exaggerating. You don't really know that. You have to decide that for yourself in a way.
Right.
I think that's the way life is.
Yeah. There's nothing tidy here. It's messy and complicated, and in terms of this, how we're supposed to perceive what people are saying about Theo. And I like that because it keeps you on your toes and makes you think. And makes you think about these personal relationships that we have in our own lives, and how well do we ever really know anyone, and then ultimately, yes, we just hope we can know ourselves.
Yeah. So I agree. I think that it's really here's Sam. The last scene takes place at the 50th reunion of his class. And he was a very unpopular kind of nerdy kid, and but as he says, at your 50th reunion, all the jocks are hobbling around too, and everybody's nice to each other, and you sort of, so there's a sort of boom boom room effect about aging, and everyone's equal under in their old age, and you see people that you think of one way when you're 14 years old, and when you're 68, they're different.
That makes me realize, why I love the form of the novel is because you can do that. You can cross time like that. And did you have an immediate sense that you were going to span a lot of time? And how does time?
I guess I did, but I don't think I knew how difficult that would be. It's a short book,
yeah,
but it does cover a lot of time. But one thing I did find that I really enjoyed writing this book was a lot of writers are maximalists. But I found that what I really liked was just implying things very. They're there if you pay attention, but I like the concision of that. And,
and you're very good at it. So what's your revision process?
Well, that's very nice of you to say. I mean, but and I think because I have written poetry that that I learned something from that about that. So,
and in covering the time, you get to, we're in a whole different place. Even 2007, and we can talk about Boris. What a great character, the head of school, who has to deal with the fallout here and the ways they're surprising to me. But what I was in 2007, that is dealt with one way. It wouldn't be dealt with today. And I forget the name of the young woman who's a student there. She's going to Stanford with her girlfriend.
Oh yeah.
It's totally different.
Daphne Homans.
Daphne.
Yeah. She's a firebrand, and she's an investigative reporter, and she finds out things in ways that the other characters don't. She's much more, of a journalist,
And she's also openly gay. So you see how, times at the school have evolved. And
she's openly gay, and it's not a big deal either.
Not a big deal. And so how much were you playing with the times changing? How was that fun for you? Did you do more research? Did you?
I suppose a lot of the book is about the passage of time and changing of perspectives and stuff. And you're right about Boris. I mean, Boris Crone. I met a man at another event. He said, no headmaster of a school like that would ever be called Boris Crone. And I just thought, you're wrong about that. But I thought it was such an interesting point of view for him to have. But Boris Crone he's kind of an outsider. He's more rah-rah than the old guard. And he wants to belong, but he's an operator. And I had great fun with Boris. He was really, there is a satirical element to the book, and he kind of embodies it in a way.
Who surprised you in these characters?
Well, he surprised me because I ended up, one thing that comes clear in the book is Boris is an operator, but he's also very shrewd about people. And he, why does he ask Sam to investigate this charge? Because he knows that Sam is involved somehow, connected to the guy who, he just has an intuition that he can use Sam to solve his problem, and he does.
Right. Yeah.
That's not spelled out, but it's there if you to be discovered.
Yeah, it's totally there. As his relationship with his ex-wife, and his whole personal transformation is there, but it's not. It's there in light steps, but you get the overall picture, and it's very moving, very, very moving. That whole layer, like I said, there's so many layers. Your relationship to poetry, you speak about, being concise, and you're a renowned poet, and have spent a lot of time, if your creative time devoted to poetry. What's the difference? What's the
you can't. One thing I loved in doing this book is it's so antiphonal. There's so many different things happening at once, and you can't really do that in a poem. And you can't really have, I mean, people do have characters in poetry, but Robert Frost did that, and Edwin Arlington Robinson did it. But most poetry today is very me, I and you, and maybe he and she, but this is much more about a community. And the school itself is a character in the book, and I got into the multivalent thing.
You understood it was
poetry.
Right. And then, but with the language, with your experience of writing on the sentence level, not just the character, but your process as a poet, your understanding of language on that level, and taking it to either this other format.
Well, who was it? I think it was Ezra Pound said, well, poetry should be at least as well written as prose. Well, I sort of feel like prose should be as well written as writing the sentences was a lot of the fun of it. And if the sentence feels right, then it means that you've got the right stuff in that sentence and nothing else, and I think that I found that really rewarding, fun. And I love revising. I love writing over and over and over. I do that in poetry too. I love that process of refining.
Do you spill out an entire draft and then go back, or do you?
Oh yeah, I mean, I have so many drafts on my computer of start with the chapters, and then yes, I do go over and over it. Yeah.
How do you understand when you said earlier that that you tried different structurally over weaving it, and that didn't work, but how do you know when you've got it? How do you know when?
Oh, well, I just think I'm an editor by profession, so all of a sudden, I mean, I know there are things that I wish I could improve, but I guess I felt that I felt that reading it the way it turned out was worked for me. So
it's like you just feel it. You just, okay.
Yes, I think that
wasn't working. But then this is, and it's just a sensation, a feeling.
I guess so, yeah. I don't know if I've thought through the answer to that, but yes, I think that I finally felt it was putting the memoir part in a box at the beginning made sense, and then you could go ahead with the book and draw on that in the second part. Yeah.
So you just said about being your career was you spent many years as an editor, but I would imagine editing yourself in that way. I mean, we all have to be pretty good at revision, obviously, putting on that hat and seeing the book from a different point of view. But I imagine that would be really tricky.
Well, there's I'm sure when you're writing your books, you're editing yourself, but you also probably really appreciate or enjoy the process of being edited by someone, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, and I had that with both of my novels, editors who really, they put me through paces, and I didn't always agree with them, but I often learned many things about the text, about myself, about what wasn't working, and like just the little thing about putting in the table of characters, that solved a lot of problems, because Judith Gurevich, she said, I can't keep these people apart, and people do that. I'm glad to hear you didn't have that problem, but there are a lot of characters, and so
it's a smart tactic. In the Elena Ferrante novels, where she does it at the start, so that you know who all these families are, and it makes sense. I never referred to them, but occasionally, like if you got completely lost. So, but was the experience so you've been edited now for fiction twice. Was that hard to, I know it's a relief and it's wonderful, but that's your job. And
I mean, no, I totally I have no problem with being edited. I think it's as I always say to the people I work with, well, it's your book in the end. I'm giving you my take on this book. You can use it as you wish, and then there's the dialogue, and that's great. I mean, speaking as an editor, that's always fun. Well, not always, but it's usually fun, because you're talking to them about the thing that matters most to them. So they're very, they're engaged. They may disagree, but it's always very, that's the thing I like best about my work as an editor, actually.
So there's a question from the audience. It happens to be Paul Eli. I know he worked with you, and I went to graduate school with Paul. Paul says,
Paul is the person who pointed out something to me that I did not understand myself.
Really?
Yes.
Do we get to hear what that is?
Well, it's too complicated, I think.
Yeah,
but what is Paul's question now? What is?
Have there been reactions from prep school classmates? People saying that's the way it was, or no way?
I have had quite a few reactions from some of my classmates, and most of them, all of them, really have been very positive. Which I wasn't sure that would be the case, So it's been very gratifying, actually. Yes. Yeah.
Janie's back.
Hi, I'm back. Yeah, well, I'm just coming on because I actually had a question come in through the chat, but it went directly to me. And this person's question was, whoopsie, hang on. They want to know, they're saying the students, at most prep schools, and in this one, the students have affluence, if not affluent, if not wealthy parents. They assume that they are on the path to an Ivy League school, and that schools like Princeton and Harvard will welcome them. So they want to know, how do you feel affluence affects the lives of the characters in your book, and how they view the world, and also how it affects the trajectory of the plot?
Well, that's an interesting question. First of all, I think in the old dispensation, the old part of the book, it was very true that these kids were on the old boy network and the track to the Ivy League and stuff. I don't think that's true today, by the way. I think that going to a private school like that is not a guarantee that you're going to go to Stanford or Harvard, or it's just not. And also, as I point out in the book, the schools have become very aware of their social responsibility. They're need blind in their admissions very often, as when they can be, and they're very privileged environments, but I think the schools that I am aware of tend to be very conscious of their responsibilities, and I think they seek to sort of represent the importance of service. But it is by its nature a privileged education. But I think they're trying to make that privilege available as broadly as they can today.
Yeah.
That's my take on it anyway. I don't know if that's an answer to the person's question or not, but
I mean, I think they're also getting at the affluence of the
you
character
know,
and the outlook on the world.
as Sam says in the book, that I think half the kids are on full scholarship or something. You know, it's much broader. It's a much broader student body than it used to be.
Mhm.
Right.
On the other hand, when I went to boarding school in the 60s, the tuition, room and board was $1,800 a year. So that, I mean, those were $1963, but still, there's been a ballooning of cost in education. It was not, the affluence issue was different in those days, I think.
Mhm. Okay, are there any more questions from the audience or from Martha?
Well, I always have questions, but I'm still interested in, what the challenges were, what was, what surprised you, what was hard to sort out. It took you 6 years. I'm sure the struggle with time and structure, but.
Well, there's, as you indicated, there are a lot of different themes in the book. There's the theme of teaching. There's this theme of the all boy environment. There's this theme of homosexuality. There's the theme of abuse. There's the theme of self-actualization for adolescents. So there are many different things that are all rolling around, twining around each other, and that's the fun of it. But it's also difficult.
Yes. And to wrap that around forward momentum is tricky too. When you have these ideas and you have propulsion working together and all these characters, it's tricky.
But that's true of. Don't you think that's true of your books too?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm so interested in how it's done, like what happens behind the curtain, because it is it's a mysterious process.
Yeah.
And,
now that it's over, I've kind of missed the intensity of it. It was so enveloping for
right.
a long time.
You have this thing to go back to that's yours, that's nobody cares about at the moment, when you're sitting there doing it by yourself. So you can sort of, you can be anxious and despairing, but you can also play and be light.
Right,
and have
right. It's private.
purpose.
It's your baby, right?
Yeah.
And now
So
it's out there, and
that's maybe the question to end on is what's next for you? More novels?
Well, I'm writing a poetry project I've been working on with my left hand for quite a while. And I would like to finish that. And, I would like to write another prose book, but I have no idea what it will be at this point. So I'm open to suggestions, auto suggestions. I did enjoy it greatly, and I learned a huge amount from it. And I'm sure you have this experience too. When it speaks to people, that's so moving.
Yeah. And it speaks to people. It really spoke to me. It was a joy to read it. So
thank you so much. Thank you for your sensitivity to it. It's wonderful to talk to you.
Wonderful to talk to you as well. You're muted.
Yeah, there I am. Yeah, we had one little other question just come in through the chat. Someone was wondering here if you did research beyond campus visits. For example, did you study old British films or rewatch Robin Williams and the Dead Poets Society? Or
I've never seen Dead Poets Society. and I actually watched someone who read the books talked about If, the movie about an English boarding school, and I saw that many years ago. I watched it the other night, and it was interesting. And I read some other books about boarding schools and stuff. One that I really thought was so good is Old School by Tobias Wolff.
Oh.
Wonderful book. One that I thought was less wonderful is A Separate Peace, which is about a boarding school in World War II. But that's considered a classic of.
Yeah, it's a required reading. Both my children read it in 7th grade or something. And I read it along with them, and it maybe
it's a little bit out of date, I think, for today. But it's about a relationship between two boys and their jealousy and something else underneath.
Yeah, there's a sort of love tension underneath, but it's so unspoken that, But those were
about Curtis Sittenfeld wrote Prep, which is actually set here in Lawrenceville at the Lawrence. Well, yeah.
Yeah, that's a very powerful book. Yeah.
Yes, it is. Okay, well, this has been such a wonderful conversation. Thank you both. Thank you, Martha, for your thoughtfulness in preparing the questions. And thank you, Jonathan, for your generosity of time and your reading. And congratulations on this launching this book in the world. And we look forward, Martha, you and anybody in your family always has a home here at the library.
We're all writers.
She's a denizen. She's a graduate of the Princeton Library, aren't you?
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
We have hosted, I think we've hosted all of the McPhees at one point or the other at the library. It's wonderful. And Jonathan, again, congratulations on this wonderful novel. And thank you to everybody who tuned in here with us on Zoom. We will have this up on YouTube at the Princeton Library channel for anybody who wants to watch the replay or share it with others. And so this is the awkward part of our conversation when you're virtual, where we all just say goodbye and disappear. So thank you again, and good evening, everybody.
Thank you. Lovely to speak with you, Jonathan.
It's great. Great to see you. Thanks so much.